All right, so let's do a code along for week 5 for looping, right? Iteration is the kind of more recognized term by people who do this, but really looping is what it's doing, and it kind of just, I think that's a better word, but you use whichever one you want. So I've given you a link, kind of what I've done before, right, to the guides, and these are good to look through. And in this case, I'd recommend copying this content for the for, because that's what we're going to write today. We're going to write some for loops because it's kind of the traditional loop, even though I think the for of, like I showed you, is a little more straightforward. You're going to see for loops if you look at anybody's code. So let's do them. Okay, so here's what you want to do. Is we have already had you set up the week 5 folder. I showed you my output from the looping over the array, and now down on the bottom go ahead and paste in that for, and this is the signature, what we need to include to write a for loop, and then go ahead and fire up live server. Okay, so to write a for loop you need a couple things. You need a for, that's the JavaScript command. Okay, open and close parentheses and open and close brackets. So what do we know first by just looking at this syntax is that we have a block scope, right? So just, it's not, so inside of here, right, this is block scope. So we can, whatever we define in here is not on the global scope. It is going to be only defined within this loop. All right, so that's the first thing. So now within here, this is where we're going to see something. If you've never written JavaScript, you won't. This will be the first time you've seen this, because the for loop, the for of, was so straightforward in my opinion. This will have a little more code, but once you break it down, it starts to make more sense, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to first initialize. So we're going to set up a variable, and I is the most common. We're going to set that variable equal to 0. So the first time this code runs, it's going to set up a variable. And now it's going to look for a condition. So that condition, and don't write this yet, is either true or false. Okay, now it has to resolve to true or false. If we just put true in here, the loop would run what we call infinitely, and it would lock up your browser because there's never a condition where it's false, right? And you can't, and if you started with false, it would never run. So that's why it's important when setting these conditions, you think about it. So we could say I, right? And in this case, less than or equal to 5. Okay. So when we look at this condition, so the first time it runs, it sets I equal to 0, and then it looks for the condition. Again, it hasn't even run in here yet. It hasn't even said if it's true, right? Because it has to evaluate this expression. But once it does, if it's true, then it's going to run whatever's in here. So then we say console.log I, semicolon. Now, after the loop runs, it's going to say, hey, afterthought. And we're going to increment by 1 this I. Okay, now the way, and don't write this yet, the way I had shown you before to do kind of add 1 to it or add a value to it, we wrote it like this. And this is kind of the longhand way of writing this. Really what we can do is just say I, and you may have already seen some folks in this class write it like this. I++. So this is what we call an incrementer. So it's basically going to take whatever the value of I is and add 1 to it. That is a shorthanded way of writing that incrementer. And by the way, if you ever want to know that, you can actually just go search increment and you can do decrement. Decrement would be the minus. There's also many others, and these are operators that you can use to check these conditions, right? So operators and expressions is part of where this adds. So it's a good idea to look through here and see and get familiar with some of these concepts that we will see as we write more code. Okay. All right. So let's actually now go over to the browser, and in here I have my code up already. This happened to me recently. I'm going to go ahead and restart it. Okay. So let's go here. I'm going to stop the. And by the way, when you run, somebody asked me the other day this, right? When you get this, all this means is that there's not an index file for it to load on the root. So right now the root is my private repo, right? So there's nothing in here that isn't. If there was an index, it would show it. But because it doesn't have it, it's looking at this, saying, hey, which folder do you want me to run? That's why that's happening. So let's go to sources, go to main, and hit set a breakpoint right on this line, because I want to show you how to walk through each line. Now in this case, the semicolons represent, right, an expression. So in between these open and closed parentheses, there's actually 3 lines of JavaScript. The way you can see this is you refresh, okay, you hit step. Now what it did here, and I should have done this, shown you before, but this executed, so it set I equal to 0. And now it evaluated is I less than or equal to 5. And by the way, if you're not sure, right, or go down and write it on the console, right? So in this case, I is less than 5. So it's true. So the statement now, right, will run. It's not even going to look at this line, look at that line yet. And notice how it drops right down past the comment. And now it's like, okay, now output, this is the first time through that line. So now we'll go up here. And now notice what happens. Now that we've come back, so we've looped through the first time, or in this case we've set it to 0, so it's not the 0 time, it's the first time. And now we're going to take that I value and we're going to increment it. And now it jumps back here because what it's doing is now evaluating this condition again. Now it doesn't have to set the variable because it's already been set the first time through. Now it's just checking the condition. So now if I hit step, now it's going to say I is what? I is equal to 1. Right? And it's outputting this so we can see it run. Okay, so now we're on 3, and now we're on 4. Now, when we get to 4, right, is 4 less than or equal to 5? Well, we haven't hit the step where we increment yet. So once we increment, right, then it's 5, so it's equal to, it's not less than. So now the loop says, oh, I'm done. The condition is now false, and I drop out. I stop looping, okay? So that is a more, there's more things you can set up here, right? There's more ways to control this loop, so that's why this is a classic loop. But JavaScript over time, you see, has many other ways of looping, mostly because it's a very common thing we do in JavaScript is to run things multiple times. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is actually have a challenge for you. Okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to stop, pause this, right? And how would you, actually I'm going to, instead of modifying, right, actually just copy this code, right? And now what I want you to do is the first challenge. The first challenge is, right, how would you modify this code? Again, leave the other one in place so you can see it, right? How would you modify this code to count from 1 to 15? Okay, so here's what I'll have you do. I'll put this in the writing. So this will be your first commit that you'll do. I'll do that, but go ahead and hit pause here and attempt that code, and then don't hit play until you've attempted it to see if you could get this to work. Okay, hit pause here. Okay, so even if you didn't get it to work, I want to have seen that you attempted the code, right? So now if we want to have it count, right, have this code count from 1 to 5, what we could do here is first start with 1, right? Now, what if we wanted to count to 15? Would we just change this to 15? Would that count to 15? Did you try that, right? Let's go look at it. Let's go look at the code and then figure out, maybe I'm going to I'm going to take off that breakpoint. Oh, I have to let it run. Cool. Right, I'm going to set the breakpoint here, run through. It's a lot of times I have to do it. Oh, and then actually this is good. So I'm going to hit here, stepping through that code. The first time it's 1. So now I at least started at 1. And now, and this is good to know, if you don't know how to do this, you can actually just let it resume and run the entire script. Ah, okay, right? So notice it only went to 14. Why is that the case? There's a couple ways we could have fixed this. We could have said 16, because we know, right, the condition. We could have said also less than or equal to, right? That's the other way we could have done this. And by the way, if you noticed here, right, greater than or equal to, where's less than or equal to? Right here, right, less than or equal to. So could we have just done this, right? Let's see it run, right? Let's let it run. Yeah, that works. Okay. Does that make sense? I hope so, because I'm going to get rid of this because I don't need it, right? So this is a very common thing, and you can kind of look at this to start to see where we could use this in a way. Matter of fact, I think that's going to be the second challenge, is to have you rewrite this to use a traditional for loop. But let's do another one. How would we modify this code? I'm not going to do this as a challenge, okay? But how would we modify this to count backwards, right? So, by the way, even though I'm not making you do a challenge, stop and try this, because this is really where you start to learn. So you might think about all the different ways, how could we count backwards? Okay. Give it a try. I'm going to say, let's start lower. Let's start at 6. Okay? So then, instead of adding, we'd subtract, decrement. Okay? Now, I know we didn't introduce that term, so if you didn't get it, that's okay. So now what do we want to say? Right? I needs to be what? Greater than or equal to what? Does it be 6? Would it do it? Let's try it. Let's look at it. Let's run it. Right? Oh, take off this, let it run. Cool. Now, did that work? No, it didn't. Didn't work. Now, why didn't it work? Right? So in your notes, why didn't that work? Why didn't I greater than 6? That's right, because we said it, right? So in your notes, how would we fix this code, right? So that will be your second coding challenge. How would we fix this code to actually count backwards? All right, so pause the video, see if you can fix it. Okay. So if we set I, how about, could we say, is I, now we could say, I is I less than 0? Would that count backwards? Right? Let's see. Oh, I have to let it run. Because if we start with I as 6, we say I less than equal to 0. What is, let's look at it, right? Because again, this is where you start to troubleshoot. Oh yeah, actually I have to set it here. I can already tell it's not. Right? Is I, first time it runs in, it's 6, right? Okay, so is I less than 0? It's false. Right. Now, did I purposely do it? More than anything, I just want you to start to understand how to troubleshoot a loop like this if you ever encounter it. Is actually more of what I was trying to do here. So let's do this. Right, so let's step in. Aha. Is I greater than 0? Right? It is. I is greater than 0. So we can hit 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, actually, no. Yeah, no, 1. Right, and then it worked. So more than anything, it's starting to understand, right? Because it's okay. You don't use less than or greater than every day. And if you don't, right, if you're not somebody that's totally into math, that the first time you see that, it'd be like, what? Okay. All right, so that was your second challenge. So we have 2 challenges here. And now I actually have one more for you. Okay. Now I want you to refactor, and this is where I'm going to actually stop this video, right? And I'll give you one because I have 2 code reviews, and in this case I'm going to have you try to refactor this code up here to be a for loop. Now your code could look different inside, but the key is that it's outputting some content, and this is the code I will have gone over for attendance. Okay, but how could you rewrite this to output that same, but with a for loop? Okay, so give that a try. In the next video I'll show you my code.